This woman was surprised to discover her father left her a house in her inheritance. The house in question was the family's forgotten home and had been abandoned for many years. She visited the house and turned pale when she found someone inside, but that would just be one of the first surprises. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Becca didn't get much time to deal with her father's sudden death. She had been his only family left, so she was the one tasked with organizing the funeral and handling all other arrangements. And when that was finally over, she received an invite from the notary for the will reading. Becca read the invite and sighed deeply. She didn't care about the inheritance. She just wanted to deal with his sudden death. So Becca went over quickly to put it behind her. But when the notary read her the will, she got the surprise of a lifetime. Her father had left her a house. "What do you mean a house?" Becca asked, astonished. She never knew her father had another house. "Where is it?" The notary explained that the house was the family home, which had passed through generations and was long forgotten. Becca agreed on the forgotten part, as her father never mentioned it to her. Becca left the notary's office with mixed feelings. The unexpected inheritance made her confused but also very curious. What would the house look like? Could she live there? She decided to answer these questions by visiting the house, but it was already late afternoon, so she had to be quick. Dusk was already falling when Becca arrived at the address. She was surprised to find a huge driveway with a garden leading up to the house. "This place is huge," she mumbled in disbelief as she steered up the driveway. But as the giant house came into view, her body tensed up. Becca was halfway through the driveway when the house came into view, and she suddenly braked. Only a vague outline of the house was visible from this distance, but something stood out against the darkness. There was a light on inside. Becca stared at it in confusion. What was going on? The more Becca looked at it, the more confusing the situation became. The house was abandoned long ago, and Becca could see it was boarded up. You would expect the house to be cut off from electricity, but clearly not. The lone light in the abandoned house, surrounded by darkness, gave Becca the creeps. Maybe there was someone inside. Becca's breath halted because of the thought. If that was the case, she needed to call for help, but she realized she could hardly do that because the light was burning. She needed to know what was happening, so she exited her car and carefully continued on foot. Becca kept her eyes on the house as she approached it. Her breath and footsteps were the only sound she heard, but then she let out an anxious gasp. A shadow moving beside the light. But as soon as it appeared, it disappeared again. Was that the shadow of a person or something else? Becca's heart was pounding and her mind was racing. She realized the probability of someone being inside had increased tremendously, but she still wasn't sure. Was this the right moment to call for help? She gathered her courage with a few deep breaths and decided to continue her journey to find answers. But then, right when Becca was almost at the front door, she stepped on a twig that snapped in half under her weight. She froze in place and held her breath as the sound echoed through the silent night. But the snap wasn't the only thing that ripped the silence. Becca could hear sounds coming from inside. Becca was still frozen in place, but then she realized what was going on. There had been someone inside, and the twig alerted the person. Becca heard stumbling, followed by quick footsteps, and realized the person was running away. Without thinking, she moved to the door and pulled it open. The door opened with a creak, and Becca stepped inside just in time to see someone exit through the back door. It was just a split second, so Becca could only see a vague outline of a lengthy person, but the fact that she saw someone leave her house caused her to turn pale from shock. Becca hurried to the back door, but no person was in sight. She quickly closed and locked it, after which she carefully searched the whole house, ensuring nobody was there while locking everything. Becca realized the abandoned home was an attractive place to seek shelter for homeless people, but she obviously scared the person away now. The silence had returned as Becca was now alone in the house. She took a couple of deep breaths to calm herself down. "Well, let's see what this house is about," Becca said as she started to look around. In each room she walked in, her eyes grew wider. This is amazing. Even though the house had been abandoned long ago, Becca could still see the beauty of what it once was. It needed a lot of work, but Becca knew it was worth it and decided to renovate. Not aware that decision would come with incredible side effects. The following days, Becca organized everything, and she made sure that one bedroom and the kitchen were the first to be done so she could already move in while she renovated the house. But as soon as she moved in and started on the rest of the house, strange things started happening. It took her a while to realize, but there were some weird sounds she would hear every now and then. Becca would hear scuffling sounds throughout the house, but the strange thing was that it seemed to come from within the walls. But she had a hard time precisely pinpointing the location. She realized it wouldn't be strange for such an old and abandoned house to have mice inside the walls, so she put down traps. But what confused her about the situation was that she never caught one or even saw one scurrying around. And then things became even more confusing, because sometimes, when she was renovating or just walking around, Becca could swear she heard whispers or a muffled voice. Eventually, her mind returned to the first time she entered this home and saw a homeless person. Was that person still around? The thought worried Becca, but she checked every door and window frequently to see if they were still locked and secured, and there was nothing wrong every time. The situation gave Becca a creepy feeling, but due to her frequent checks, she still felt safe. Because one night, Becca was rudely awakened by a loud scraping sound. Her body was tensed up from fright, and she stayed awake for the remainder of the night. That moment was the last straw for Becca, and she decided to hang up some cameras to see what was happening in this house. From that moment on, whenever she heard something like the scuffling sounds, a whisper, or something else she couldn't place, she would quickly scan the house and surroundings with her camera feed. But there was nothing. So Becca worked as hard as possible on the renovations, hoping things would stop when she was done. The more she checked the camera feed and saw nothing, the easier it became to ignore the sounds. This was why it took so long to realize that the sounds had suddenly stopped when she started renovating the remaining chambers. But she would soon discover the reason why they had stopped. The last remaining rooms were 3 bedrooms on the bottom floor, and Becca saved them for last because they needed the least amount of work. But soon after she got started, she noticed something. The rooms had very different and strange proportions compared to others in the house. As Becca was removing all the old furniture and moved a big closet in one of the rooms, she found something behind it. There was a door hidden behind the closet. What was this? The strange proportions of the rooms and the hidden door confused Becca but also made her very curious. She grabbed the schematics of the house and, when she took a closer look, noticed these chambers weren't supposed to be like this and that the door wasn't originally there either. First, weird sounds confused and scared her, and now she discovered a strange hidden door. This house kept surprising her. Then Becca realized that this secret doorway could give her some answers. So she gathered her courage and pulled the door open, both curious and anxious to see what was behind it. It took her quite a bit of effort, but eventually the door opened with a creak. Becca froze as she realized the door sounded exactly like the sound she woke up from. A closet blocked the door, and every door and window was locked. Becca anxiously stepped into the room. A frown appeared on her face when she looked at the room. The only light source was a window on the other side, but she didn't know there was a window there. But when she approached it, she saw it was covered by vegetation, which blocked it from view. Becca moved the vegetation aside, and more light entered the room. Now, she could finally see what it was about and search for some answers. The moment she turned around, her eyes widened from disbelief. As she had seen when she maneuvered between them, the room was filled with furniture, but something else shocked her. There was a big closet and multiple couches, but eyes darted around the room at the things lying on top of the couches and the floor. There were sleeping bags and leftover food and packaging. Becca stood in silence and stared at the sight while her mind raced and filled with questions. Becca felt a shiver go down her spine as she looked at everything in the room, and her thoughts returned to the first moment she set foot inside this house. Had that person really never gone? Were her initial feelings right all along? But she would soon discover there was something else at play. The worrying thoughts ran through Becca's head, and all of a sudden, all the sounds she had heard since moving in started to make sense. It wasn't mice or voices inside her own head. There had been someone in her house all along. She had an intruder in the house. Becca's heart pounded in her chest, and she suddenly felt very hot. She had to get out of this room as fast as possible, close it off, and get someone to help her immediately. But as Becca hurriedly made her way to the door, she accidentally bumped into the closet. Becca swore softly as she rubbed the sore spot on her knee, but then she heard something that caused her to back off immediately. After she had hit the closet, a low thump came from within. Becca's mind worked in overdrive as she realized she wasn't alone in the room. Becca held her breath as she took out her phone and entered the alarm number. Then she took a breath and shouted, "Show yourself, or I will call the police." Becca didn't want to wait long and put her words into action when she pressed the call button on her phone. Then she put her phone on speaker so the person in the closet could hear the operator answer. "What's the emergency?" The operator's voice sounded out of the phone. Becca opened her mouth to answer, but the closet door sprung open right then, and a figure emerged from inside. Becca's heart skipped a beat due to the sudden movement, and she stared at the person with a surprised expression. "Please hang up," the girl that just exited the closet begged. She folded her hands in front of her face and looked very anxious. Becca could only stare at the 20-ish-year-old girl. This was the last thing she had expected, but things got even more confusing. "We don't want any trouble," the girl said. Before Becca could fully process what the girl had said, 4 more kids, all around the same age as the girl, appeared from the closet. Becca stared at the 5 kids with astonishment. They looked very anxious and didn't look very well kept. Becca felt very confused and had a slight concern. What was going on? It all happened quickly, and Becca was still on the phone with the operator. "Hello, tell me what's going on," the operator said. But Becca looked at the group before her and knew what to do. She decided to listen to the girl's plea and hung up the phone. She wanted to hear them out. But she wouldn't act all nice and sweet because the intruders turned out to be younger than she expected. "What's going on? Who are you? What are you doing here?" she demanded in a strict tone. The girl who appeared first stepped forward and thanked Becca for hanging up and immediately continued with an apology. "My name is Christine and we're very sorry," the girl said. Christina then went on to explain that every one of them had been in the foster system but had never been adopted. After turning 18, they were forced out and have been on their own ever since. Becca realized these kids had nothing wrong in mind and just wanted shelter. Christina repeated that they were sorry every other sentence. "We didn't want to harass you or scare you, but since you live here, our life is much better," she said. Becca frowned when she heard that. "What do you mean?" Christine explained they had lived here for a few months before Becca arrived. They were used to a harsh life by now, but things changed ever since Becca started to live here. There was heat and easy access to food. They felt terrible because Becca didn't know. "But we didn't take much from you," Christina quickly added after Becca frowned again. The girl carefully walked toward the window and said they would leave through there to get food from outside. Slowly, everything dawned on Becca as she realized these kids made all the shuffling and talking noises. They looked nervous and shameful and seemed to really mean the apology. Their story was unbelievable, and Becca felt incredibly bad for them. The more she looked at them, the more she wanted to help. And she knew just the thing. The house was way too big for her, and she didn't have a plan for the remaining rooms that needed renovating. She offered them a deal. If they helped renovate, they could stay in her house until they got their lives back on track. Before they knew it, they had grown into a tight family. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.